Welcome to the Aerobic Edge podcast. I'm Joost, your coach over at Pace Buddies, and today I have a conversation that will change the way we think about running, form, and injuries. My guest today is Helen Hall. She's a movement specialist who has spent decades working with runners who've hit the wall. The people who've been everywhere, seen everyone, and tried everything, and sometimes told they'll never run again. Helen doesn't look at where the pain is, she looks at what's going wrong further up the chain. And her central idea is a surprising one. Most injuries below the waist have their root cause above the waist. We talk about head alignment and why it's important. We talk about the arm swing and how that improves our efficiency. Throughout the conversation, she does some demonstrations. So if you're listening to the audio version of the podcast, maybe you'll want to check the video version as well to see the demonstration Helen Hall does for us. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Helen Hall. Hello, Helen, and welcome to the Aerobic Edge podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, thank you. I'm really delighted to have a nice chat with you about running efficiency and injury rates and how we can help other runners to move more fluently. But before we start, maybe you can tell something about yourself. How did you become active in the endurance world?
Thank you. I'm hopeless at this bit. So I'm a runner. I work with movement issues. So my day-to-day work is helping people uncover what is in the way of their healing. So as you mentioned before we went on air, so many lovely runners enthusiastically starting and then so quickly stopping. And the injury rates high, and I spend my working life now in the main figuring out why the repetitive injuries come back, why the pain has become chronic. And I do all of that with the most advanced motion analysis technology in the world. And she's known as Doris. And so it's me and Doris. So I'm a runner, I play outside, I adventure, and in clinic, I work with high tech.
And Doris is something we're going to talk about as well. We want to know her as well.
I think that everybody who comes to the clinic, I don't know if they're more keen on meeting Doris than they are meeting me, but we work as a team, so we're together.
Brilliant. And in my research, I did I listened to some podcasts, one with Dr. Chatterjee and yourself. It was very nice, a very good podcast. And in that podcast, you said that often you're looked at as the last resort. Maybe other physicians gave up or they told a patient you can't run ever again, and they come to you. Where do you start with a patient like that?
Yes, and it's really sad that I am last resort. I don't mean that by, you should come to me first. I mean by that, what I feel is in my ideal world, if maybe after the next book is written, and maybe if people come to the material that I consistently share, maybe they wouldn't need to come and see me. Maybe they would have solved their problems already because they perhaps would be looking in the right place or a better place than where they were looking. So when people come to me, I have the advantage of all of their empirical evidence, everything that they have tried, and it hasn't solved the problem. Now, that is not to say that the modality that they were using, or the modalities, or the practitioners, or whatever it might be, whatever treatments, it's not to say that there's anything wrong with them or the practitioners. It's nothing to do with that. It would appear to be the wrong tool for the job. So those tools, that tool, didn't solve the problem. So the question is then, okay, why? Why is that not solving the problem? Maybe it's making things feel better temporarily, but it doesn't last. The benefits don't last. Why? So we just keep asking more questions. We don't give out answers until we've got a lot more questions answered. And so if somebody comes with, a repetitive strain, a repetitive injury, or a chronic pain, a single pain that just won't go away. Everybody's the same. I look at everybody the same. It's not even possible for me to look at anybody differently. I look at the whole of you. So maybe you come in with a foot pain. So I strongly suspect that everybody's been looking at your foot and you have been diligently doing things to your foot to help your foot. And yet the foot continues to be bothered. And invariably it's one foot. And even if it's 2 feet, one started and then the other one joined in. And they might not be exactly the same, or they swap. So I don't think I have ever, in all the years I've been at this, and it's been quite a few decades now, in all the years, I don't think I've ever come across anybody with symmetrical pain, both sides, that started the same at the same time and is always the same. It tends to be, it arrives on one side, and if it starts on the other side, it's for a different reason. So the person will come in and I'm using foot pain because of our communications before, and I would look at the whole of that person, everything else that isn't their foot, and what else within their movement patterns might be affecting the area that is in question. In this case, your foot. So there are so many, and you could call a foot, a knee, a hip, a shoulder, doesn't matter. You look at everything else revolving around that site of pain or repetitive injury, and you see what might be in the way of healing. Because we are self-organizing, amazing, self-healing organisms, and we're resilient. So if we're resilient and self-organizing, why are we ending up in this pickle? And in my experience, something is in the way.
Yeah, it's a very holistic view, because an injury can happen somewhere, but the problem might be somewhere else up in the chain. It might be a head position, or maybe a hip drop, or something else
Well,
altogether.
exactly. And that's what I consistently find. In fact, the consistency is such that on my online courses, non-negotiable 2, which is jaws and hands, so it's up here. Non-negotiable 2 is, I think, well, in my experience, at the root cause of the majority of below the waist injuries, below the waist chronic pain, below the waist repetitive injury. And it's because there's a hierarchy. So the hierarchy is, generally speaking, up here somewhere because of the influences. You mentioned heads. They're heavy. They are so heavy that back in the day, long time ago, there was a very elegant study done in Norway for back pain sufferers, and an average human head weighs 5 kilos. So way, way, way back, they had all these back pain sufferers lined up with a broomstick handle in their hand with a 5-kilo bowling ball on the top. They were holding the base of I always demonstrate using my lemony here. So they were holding the base of the broomstick, and they could all manage without too much difficulty the 5-kilo weight when it was directly above their hands. And then the 5-kilo weight was taken forward the extent to which their head was forward relative to the base of their spine. And then within seconds, everybody's, they're vibrating and they're clinging on for dear life, and their biceps can't cope. And they got a really illustrative and proprioceptive sense of what their head might be doing to their lower back. But the influence doesn't stop there. So it might be your lower back that takes the strain, but a forward head can also be neck pain, and between the shoulder blades pain, and mid-back pain, and glutes and hammies, and knees, and Achilles, and plantar fasciitis. It could be any of those things because of the effective loads and how you're moving. Karpanji came along in 75 and tied it up, our broomstick and our 5-kilo ball, and said, yes, for every inch further forward the head was relative to the base of the spine, you add the weight of another head. Well, that soon adds up. And then Hansraj in 2014 or 2015, he gave us angles. And the angles make it very easy to work with Doris, because Doris gives me, with more accuracy than an X-ray, the angle at the base of the neck, which is what Hansraj was talking about. If the angle at the base of the neck is 15 degrees rather than returning on a vertical, then now the effective weight of the head is 12 kilos. Now,
Yeah.
I mean, I just measure that so commonly, it's ridiculous. Bearing in mind that everybody who comes into my clinic, or not everybody, some are looking for efficiency of movement, but the vast majority are in a pickle.
Yeah.
And then you get to 30 degrees, and Doris measures this a lot. 30 degrees of forward trajectory at the base of the neck. Now you've got a head that weighs 18 kilos. So You try dangling nearly your luggage allowance around your neck and wander around for the day, or even try and run for the day. So people tell me, they come in, they say, oh, I've got weak, whatever it might be. And I'm thinking, with that forward head, there's not a weak sinew in your body. You are insanely strong, but it's a massive energy leak. You're just leaking energy, stopping yourself face planting. So which part of your body is taking the most strain? That hardworking area is very likely to be their problem area.
Yeah.
And then you get 45 degrees, and now you've blown your luggage allowance. 45 degrees is 22 kilos. I have measured 60 degrees twice.
Wow.
And it's a monumental 27 kilos. And by the time you get to 90 kilos, 90 degrees, Hans Raj said it's unmeasurable. That's just an awful mess. So heads, I always start with heads. My first book starts with heads. My online courses don't start with heads because we're now on our feet already. So because we're on our feet already, I start with feet. But if we weren't on our feet already, I'd start up here. Because of the influence. Hierarchically, this one sensory headquarters, our headquarters, literally, figuratively, everything here has massive influence on everything else underneath it.
Yeah, so well said. It's amazing that something as simple as that is such a big issue nowadays. Any idea how it became such a big issue, the forward head lean? Before we continue, if this conversation is resonating with you, chances are you're the kind of runner who wants to train smarter and not harder. That's exactly who I work with at Pace Buddies. I coach recreational runners to achieve their personal best, who are serious about building real aerobic fitness, the kind of fitness that actually shows up on race day. So if you're looking for one-on-one personalized coaching, head over to pacebuddies.com and book a 30-minute free consultation call with me.
Well, of course, Hans Raj calls it text neck. And that was well over 10 years ago. And I think that probably the amount of time we all spend down on our mobile phones in this position whilst moving has probably increased since he dubbed it text neck. So is it that? Well, possibly. But I think it's just another layer, yet another layer on top of everything else that hasn't been addressed. Because as a general rule, I would say, and I don't expect you to agree with me, obviously, but I get the sense, in my experience, I get the sense that people don't notice anything about their bodies until there's a problem. And when there's a problem, then they start to sit up and notice. And what they really want to do is carry on doing whatever it is that they fall in love with, but without doing the work to unravel their bodies and get their bodies in a place where they can do what they fall in love with without risk of injury, because it's something that is an innate movement pattern that the body can cope with, provided it's got enough conditioning to do quite easily. And I think that in the Western country, we have become, in Western civilizations, we have become inured to self-sufficiency, self-observation, self-awareness. So we're sort of blind to it. We're just not paying enough attention to it. So we just carry on until we slightly break or hugely break. And then we try and figure out why we're slightly broken or very broken. And then we might try and solve, generally speaking, we might try and solve that particular problem using the musculoskeletal model of strengthening, toning, and stretching. But we're not just a musculoskeletal model. And all models are incomplete. Nobody knows everything. So we can't know for sure that any model is complete, any model is the answer, because we just don't know enough yet. So with the head and the text neck and why the numbers are going up, not down, and is there more going on there now just because of heads? I think that if you top and tail, you've got the head at one end and you've got the feet at the other end. And in the Western world, bare feet are considered somewhat uncivilized. Our civilization with the rabbit's ears and inverted commas, it is more so-called refined and shod and supported and restricted. All I can think of is everything that we attach to our bodies in a restrictive way that then inhibits movement. So I think that we can simply look to the top and the bottom of our bodies and find out what's going on there. And one might be the tipping point. It could be either end would be the tipping point. But the point is, we do not pay enough attention. Where in other civilizations, they have 9 senses, none of which are our 5 senses. They would like, well, those aren't senses, those are externals coming in. Our 9 senses are from within, interoception, not extraception. And there's a few civilizations that have been studied where their number one aspiration is balance. So they are teaching babies balance. And 3-year-olds are carrying teacups on their head while everybody else is carrying, much heavier loads. And I think in the West, we are in huge danger of thinking that that is somehow less advanced than our way of carrying stuff in one arm and in backpacks and things like this. And their answer is, well, they don't want to carry things in one arm because then that would spoil their movement patterns. It would make them feel less graceful, less organized. It would make it harder. And so they choose to put the load on their head, which is much more efficient, it turns out, than a backpack. And it leaves their arms free. But we don't do that. And now we couldn't do that because everything would fall off our heads because so many are forward.
Yeah, such a great point. But it's difficult to notice indeed, because when we run, we might think, I'm guilty of that, that we have the most perfect running form there is, until we video ourselves and think, is that me? And then we start to notice. So how can we begin being more self-aware in our form? I think it starts before we start running, to have a good posture, good form, or is our head on straight?
Yeah. So you bring up the answer that I always provide, and you've already given it. So we're seemingly glued to these devices, and yet we don't use them to our advantage pre any problem. So we don't know how we stand and how we move until something goes wrong, as a general rule. So when people come into clinic, Doris, she just says it how it is. So there's no fudging and extricating yourself away from whatever shapes you're making. She calls it, and it's repetitive. You're making the same shapes over and over again because that's the only way that you can move in this gait pattern where there's not enough time to think about how we're moving. Walking is neurologically the most challenging thing we do. There is so much going on in the 0.7 of a second that you're in contact with the ground. And so people think that they're trying to walk in such and such a way. But if you are aware of one thing, you're making one thing happen, you're creating tension in the system that then will preclude something else from innately happening, is a general rule of thumb. So in the book, I talk about get your mate to video you. So we have all these devices, take static pictures, don't stand to attention, perfect posture. We don't even know what that is. So it's just you stand in the way that you stand upright, and somebody takes a picture of you from the front, from the back, and from the side. And then you get your framework. And I do this in clinic. This is how I work in clinic. So I see the frame. I'm not looking for perfect posture. I'm just looking for the frame is like this. I need a context for the movement. The frame looks like this. And then when they move, what stays the same? And you can do the same. Everybody can do this. So it's standing still and then moving. What stays the same? Everything should change. And of course, then everything should change in a helpful, efficient direction. So you might stand, for instance, just to blow that principle away, you could stand beautifully, stacked, beautiful, and nothing to report here. Nothing looks out of place. Everything looks at ease. And then you go into your run and you hinge forward from the hips, and you're running like a bulldozer or a bull in a china shop. And then, everything has changed now. Everything has changed, but not in the right direction. But you might be doing that because you have heard about a forward lean, you read it in Google, you read it in a magazine, or somebody said to you, oh, you've got to lean forward. it's more efficient. So you might be doing that deliberately, thinking that is better. But I think that every cue as a coach, every cue that I've ever used, every cue that has ever been used out there in the cueing world will have worked for a cohort of people. But it won't work for everybody because it depends. So for the person who was roadrunner, meet, leaning backwards as they ran, a forward lean would probably stack them beautifully upright so that their head still weighed 5 kilos. I'm hypothesizing. I don't know. But I strongly suspect that the methodology that promotes a forward lean did not mean hinge at the hips by 45 degrees. I'm pretty sure. I never met them, but I'm pretty sure they didn't mean that. So you might think that you've just got a teeny tiny forward lean. Until you see it, how do you know? Because our proprioception, our body's awareness of itself in motion, in my experience, is poor because we don't pay attention until we're in pain.
Yeah.
So if we could all just look at ourselves with not judgment, just a calm, open mind of, oh, well, I didn't think that's a surprise to me. So when I'm in clinic, I say to whoever I'm working with, is that a surprise to you? Did you know that? And the invariable answer is no. So their shoulder might be up by their ears and they didn't know. And you would think that that would be easy because they'd see it in the mirror. But when we look in the mirror, we're not really looking at our wholeness. We're looking at whatever we're doing. We're looking at our bristles that we're shaving. We're looking at our hair that we're brushing. We're looking at whatever it is that we're doing in front of the mirror. We're not looking, I don't think, we're looking at the whole.
Yeah.
We're not seeing where our bits and bobs just hang out when we're standing still. And even if we're standing in the middle, we don't notice these things. And I think if we could just start with the basics, just start noticing that. Where do I stand? Just where? Where do I stand viewed from the back? Where do I stand viewed from the side? And you can learn a lot about where the pressures in a system might be when you're standing still. It might switch as you move because it depends on your movement patterning as to how you take your static frame to your moving frame. But yeah, taking pictures and using your mobile device is, I think, one of the best places to start before you start.
Exactly. And maybe a first step could even be, as you just said, just noticing how you stand in the mirror, maybe a full body mirror, and see if there's any disbalances in shoulders, hips. Would that be a good start for someone?
Yeah. And because if you didn't know that one shoulder was elevated and you think, well, when did that happen? All you have to do is go scrolling back in photo albums. Everybody's got thousands of photos now going back years, and iCloud has them all. So it would be interesting to speak to iCloud and say, how many tilted shoulder girdles are you seeing there? And I think iCloud would tell us, well, actually quite a few million. And people are oblivious of it. But it makes tilted shoulder girdles have massive influences on our ability to shock absorb. So you're then instantly and obliviously creating the potential for higher landing forces, impact forces for your system to have to mitigate simply because a shoulder has been left, up by one ear and you haven't noticed. And some people find it very difficult to see stuff, but the devices make it really easy. Certainly I'm on a iPhone and there's a ruler. I don't know. I'm sure Android phones have the same thing. You can line up a ruler and draw a line through the middle of your body to see if through your belly button, it goes through your nose, viewed from the front, and it goes between your legs equally. So you can see if you are symmetrical left, right, as well as viewed from this side. It does vertical lines. It does, you can do anything with a ruler. And you could, I sometimes get people, if you've got a full length mirror, you can draw a line down the mirror. You can drop a skipping rope, dangle a skipping rope. So you have a vertical plumb bob. You can just be creative and explore to see where do I stand, and then you can get a mate to film you. And all you need is a few seconds away from camera, because otherwise you become a speck in the distance and you're not able to see anything anyway. So it's literally a few seconds away from camera, towards the camera, and across camera. And you'll get a flavor of, oh, I didn't know I did that. And anything that you didn't know before is gold, because now you can set about figuring out, well, why is it there? What's going on with that? Maybe there's a reason. Maybe there was an impact injury donkey's years ago. Maybe you can't think of a reason, but now you can start to explore your body in a different way because you now have more information. All you're doing is gathering all the information that I gather. As a matter of course, I just do it hugely accurately with the help of Doris.
Then what's the next step? Maybe we noticed our shoulders are uneven. Do we work with cues, or how do we work from there into our posture and into our walking and running?
Well, that's a really good question. Back in the day when I was younger and not as wise, or hopefully I'm wiser now, back in the day, I would have cued that. I would have I would have given cues to soften something that was tense. And for some, that would work. But it turns out that by thinking of something and cueing it, it doesn't necessarily become a habit. So say there was clear tension holding a shoulder elevated. Just continually thinking about relaxing that tension may solve the problem, because there was no need for it to get up there. It had just got there by habit for some reason, maybe a work position or a carrying loads position, and then it doesn't need it anymore, so you can let it go. But if it stays there despite cueing, then it needs to be there for some reason. Either it can't let go, or it has to stay up as some kind of strategy because of something else not being able to do whatever it needs to do. So nowadays, I don't cue right from the get-go. I rarely cue from the get-go because I'm looking for, having learned more over the years, I'm looking to get to the root cause rather than paper over the cracks. So head position, let's stick with the head because it's so massively influential. We can find the position of better head not through cueing, but by finding it proprioceptively in your system. Then you can notice the tensions that the head, when it's not perched effortlessly, create. So should we do that now?
No, perfect.
So if people are just sitting listening to this, just don't change anything, but just look over one shoulder. Don't force the range, just a comfortable range. So you just look over one shoulder, come to the middle, look over the other shoulder, come to the middle. And you'll get a flavor of what you see. So it's the range and the ease. So the range is what you see at your end range of motion and how comfortable it is, how easy it is in both directions. Then we'll wiggle ourselves into a slightly more, or probably slightly more upright position. It will probably be a little bit further back than we were, probably. If we were just sort of relaxed, slightly hunched forward, which is what I tend to see, to be upright, you'll be a little bit further back. And in that position, you'll have, before we do that, let's just be natural again. Just, so you've looked to the left and looked to the right. Now just wiggle your head. You just sort of, can you wiggle your head? Is it wiggleable, or is it quite hard to be wiggly? How much tension is there? So then we can just lean back a little bit, just a little bit. It's just, you're not leaning right back. It's just go back a little bit from where you were and wiggle your head again. Can you feel it's looser? Is it different? Then, if you think, oh my goodness, that might be a bit looser, you don't force anything, and don't believe me. Definitely never ever believe me. Believe you. Okay, so we might have a little bit more of a wibbly wobbly head. So then we're going to look over our shoulder, and we're going to see what we see at our end range, which might be different, and it might feel different. Did you feel it different?
Yeah, absolutely. It's more free, and you can get farther to the side with ease.
Yeah. So, and how that position where you leant back a little bit more and found that wibbly wobbly place, did that place feel familiar?
It feels like like I'm going too far backward.
Yeah, and that is so ridiculously common. So the ridiculous thing is, upright, that ease, feels for the vast majority of people
It's going
as
backwards.
if they're leaning back, which of course is bonkers. And we need to what's the word? we need to become sovereign over our innate, erect, at ease uprightness. This is our default position. It's not perfect posture. The view from the side, when the head is above the rib cage, is above the pelvis, is above the feet, that stacked position is considered to be the position from which we have maximum movement potential. So if you're a runner and your head is forward, to some degree, you have a suboptimal potential for movement, which just seems ridiculous given the fact that you're trying to run. So you're not as free within your system straight off the bat because your head isn't perched effortlessly. There will be less movement available, at least somewhere, and this is what I measure. So when you're sitting still, it's quite easy to notice. Then I would encourage you to do it up against a wall, because the wall will tell you that you are absolutely not leaning back. And then your senses have to retrain your vestibular system, because your vestibular system thinks that here is upright and here is leaning back, and it isn't. So here it thinks, yeah, that's it. But here, no, that's leaning back and you're going to topple backwards. So when you get to standing, what you'll find is you'll realize there's a change in your feet pressures. And our feet are so useful for this, because they are, they're this miraculous creation which have an enormous amount of sensory and proprioceptive information coming from them. So if you're leaning back, your weight will be more in your heels. So you might think that, if you're a backward leaner, and I demonstrate this often simply because there are a lot of backward leaners, but their rib cage is backward, but the head is forward. And so in this position, they are trying to find a better head position. So they're taking their head back, but their rib cage is already back. So then this is an impossible position to be in. So when you stand, you've got to find, well, where is the pressure in my feet? And if I'm standing and I haven't done anything yet, and all the weight is in my heels, then it's very likely that the rib cage is behind the pelvis as your default, which would put the head over the pelvis, but forward relative to the rib cage. Does that make sense?
Yeah, then it's in balance, but it's not a good balance.
Yeah, there is a massive restriction in movement potential. So and the reason I bring that one up is because it's so common. And I discuss it briefly in the book, but I think that a lot of people skim through oh yeah, I'm upright and that's fine. So I'll help a little bit more now, because if you stand with not your heels against the wall, because hopefully we've got glutes, especially as runners, we've got glutes, and so there's a curve outwards. So the heels shouldn't really want to be able to be touching the wall easily. So we've got butt cheeks against the wall, the sticky outy bit of the rib cage, the thoracic spine around the bra strap area or the heart rate monitor area, that kind of area, or just above. And then don't force the head against the wall. Just find the wibbly wobbly place for the head. And it may not be touching the wall, the back of the head, because it depends on the shape of your rib cage, the shape of your head. It depends on all sorts of things. But just see where it normally was. Where is the weight in your feet? See, when you take it back to most wibbly wobbly with maximum head rotation, where is the weight in your feet now? And by now, having done that, you'll get information about whether or not the pelvis wants to come off the wall or the rib cage wants to come off. If it's the pelvis, you are gaining information that the rib cage wants to stay behind the pelvis all the time, which is really important information for hammy injuries, knee injuries, hammy knees, Achilles to some degree, but mainly hammies and knees. Because if I just bring my camera down a little bit, if your rib cage is behind your pelvis, I'm exaggerating so it's easy to see, and you're leaning back, your hip flexors are already pulled along. Can you see that?
Yeah.
And so lots of people, they feel that they're tight. So they stretch them because they feel tight, but they're tight because the rib cage is too far back. And this is where people get into this repetitive or chronic discomfort situation, because the reason things feel tight isn't clear. They haven't figured out why it's tight. They're putting it down to work, too much training or not enough training. I need to strengthen them or I need to stretch them. And sometimes we do. But if that hasn't solved the problem, then maybe check your stacking. Because if you're leaning back, you are pulling that which is already long.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, perfect.
So you can sit and find maximum head rotation. You can stand and find maximum head rotation. And when you're finding, once you've got that, oh, okay, it needs to be here, you can look in the mirror and you think, oh my goodness, I'm not leaning back. Or I'm not whatever I think I am. I'm just upright. Then you can walk, because there's plenty of time when you're walking to wiggle around. I mean, don't make yourself dizzy, but it's like, well, where does my head need to be? Where? For me, n=1. The only person that's important here is you. So n=1, you're walking along and you got to find this wibbly wobbly place for your head, and you will get maximum movement potential. And then you'll start to notice other things changing in your body whilst you walk, making sure that you've got your maximum head rotation. And invariably, it's along the lines of more movement elsewhere and lighter on your feet. Because as soon as you've got more movement potential, the upper body becomes more dynamic, and we aren't a sack of potatoes on our pelvis weighing more than we should do, because everything is fluidly moving. We don't leave anything behind. We're taking everything with us, but we want everything to be moving with us in harmonious cooperation rather than dragging a limb along with us. Or very commonly I'll see one arm swinging and the other arm not doing anything at all. And if that asymmetrical arm swing, if that was legs, that person would be limping. But because it's arms, nobody's noticing. But that arm isn't just not helping, it's actively hindering, because of the complexity of that arm talking to that same side leg and the opposite leg on the diagonal, and the tensions that are surrounding it that then ripple out through our interconnectedness to just about everywhere.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I did the wall exercise and I noticed two things. One was breathing was much more easy and full when I stacked. And the second was what you just told us, just walking, not running, just walking, finding that center, everything was moving along. All parts were moving.
Yes, and I measure that. I measure better movement. It's not necessarily in all areas, because there might be some work to do to free up a particular area. But I measure better movement, and as soon as you got better movement, lower impact forces. And for runners, those impact forces, because of the amount of repetitions we do, all those micro tears, they end up fatiguing us. And my whole world is about delaying fatigue so I can go for longer, more comfortably, with a smile on my face. So, because I don't enjoy pain, I don't enjoy suffering, I don't do it to wear a horsehair shirt and flog myself. It is for the enjoyment of it all. So I want there to be minimal damage as I go. So all my runs include walking, because we know that ultra distance runners have known forever. The science has just caught up that as soon as you go into a walk, you are recovering. You start healing instantly. So, 30 seconds, a walk, and I go back to my running and my average pace will stay higher. And I get so many people direct messaging me saying, I just PB'd my marathon by walking. And it kind of makes no sense. It's like, what? But of course it does make sense, because your average pace stays higher and your fatigue is staved off. And some people say, well, I'll walk when I'm tired. No, too late. Too late. That's not the point. The point is you don't get tired. I worked with one lady, and I don't know if that was the podcast that you listened to with Dr. Chatterjee, but she needed to get a particular time to qualify for some world championship or other. And in her age group, she needed to get a marathon at 4.5 hours, but she hadn't been able to train for the previous 11 weeks because of an Achilles injury. Anyway, the Achilles injury was not a problem. She didn't realize how she was moving, and she was just overstressing it. And so it was easy to help her get out of that pickle. But then she hadn't trained. And I said, well, you just have a walk-run strategy and see how you go. So this was 2 weeks to go before the London Marathon. And she said, well, I'll go off tomorrow and and see how far I get. And I said, well, okay. So off she went. And she did 11 miles off the back of nothing at all because she hadn't been able to run. And she said, oh my goodness, there was no pain. And her average pace was really quite decent. And I said, well, I'd probably rest now because now you've only got, that was literally 2 weeks to the marathon. I saw her on the Friday, she ran on the Saturday, and then the event was 2 weeks later on the Sunday. But she was so stressed about it, she couldn't help herself. So the week before the marathon, having done no training, she ran 17 miles and no pain in her Achilles and had nailed her strategy for running. And then she did the marathon and she did it. She couldn't believe it in, I think it was 4 hours 19. So well inside the time that she needed to do it in for her age group, which was in her 60s. And she had a T-shirt, something on her T-shirt, which said, I'm on a walk run strategy, so don't get too close behind me. And she ran 5 minutes, walked 30 and got a 4 hour 19 off the back of no training.
Perfect.
And she said to me, I loved the last 6 miles. I loved it. Because instead of flogging herself on that last, you get to 20 miles and it's like, oh my God, I got another 6 miles good to go. She was still feeling good. So she had looked after her body and her body was serving her. So we digressed from, that was a segue, wasn't it, from microtears. So anything that I can do to make things feel easier and that aren't as fatiguing makes me more efficient. So I can either go faster if I want to go faster, or I can go further. And of course, with conditioning, I might be able to do both.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a perfect analogy because when we're more efficient, if we're not efficient, we're leaking energy somewhere where we don't want it. And if we can stop leaking that energy, we can use it to propel us forward.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I'm all about the energy leaks and plugging them up.
Exactly. Yeah. And what are some of the most common energy leaks you come about in your practice? You just said Achilles heel, Achilles tendon pains. That's something that I've heard regularly as well. The hemis. Are there more problems you see a lot with runners?
Well, interestingly, I'm writing the second book, which is the list of 20 energy leaks, and how to plug them, and all hidden in plain sight, no training required. So I think that if we think that I think the most overlooked one is the head because of the ramifications of the head. So you brought up a beautiful ripple effect of head. So you've got the head loads, and all the scientists have done all the numbers for us and made it really clear what happens. Doris literally shows me, and it literally looks like a Christmas tree decoration that's too heavy for its branch. And it's pulling the spine over into this great big curve with the head dangling on the end of it. So that head load does exactly the same to the spine as a heavy Christmas tree decoration on a branch. And I measure that all the time. In fact, recently I had a lovely chap whose wife knew that he had a forward head of some note, as in read ginormous. But of course, who listens to their partners? But when he saw it on Doris, then he has set to and is doing something about it. And Doris, several times in Doris's and my career together, the head position has been so challenging on a spine. The spine has become so curved that she can't measure it. It's off the graph. But
Wow.
as soon as they put their head on in a better place, their spine comes onto the graph. So we are so responsive. So this negative spiral down, one thing leading to another, and then the tipping point, maybe more and more work like this is the tipping point on top of everything else. You know, too tight shoes is one of my biggest bugbears. Oh my goodness. Yes. I'll have to get on a soapbox for that one. So we are this tipping point spiraling down. It tells us about stimuli into the system creating change. So those stimuli could be negative, but equally they could be positive, and we will get change. But instead of the change spiraling us down, they'll spiral us back up again, and it can happen instantly. So we'll start a measurement, and I'm thinking, Lord above, this is a PB for Doris. Doris has never seen that before. And, if it's a Doris PB, it's not a good thing. You don't want
No.
you don't want a Doris PB because we're talking about massive extremes. And then suddenly everything is pretty average and all measurable within the space of a couple of hours. And to me, I find that really inspiring, encouraging, heartening, because people come and all of the hope has been sucked out of them. They've been told, don't run again, never run again. You'll have to live with it, learn to live with it. And you think, well, have you looked everywhere? I mean, if you've looked everywhere, fair enough. There's always more to find because we are so incredibly well made. You change the stimulus and you change the outcome. So all we need to do is explore to then start finding the stimuli that are going to create the change we want.
For me, with the athletes I coach, mostly it's hamstring and Achilles that tends to niggle a bit. Are those the most common for you as well, or do you find other problems more common with runners?
Got it. So runners' knees, well, generally speaking, it's from the waist down. So it'll be, I can't run any more than X because my lower back hurts, or my hip, or knees, or pain in feet. So it starts as jointy. So we've got those joint ones are the common joint ones. And then we've got hammies, calves, shins, so tib anterior and tib posterior, and plantar fascia. So you've got these groupings, and it'll often either be jointy or soft tissuey. But I would say that they're equally, in my experience with the runners, they're equally coming in. But the bias is below the waist, which is, it's kind of obvious because you're running, and therefore running is the problem. But I don't think it is the problem, because what I see is they take the shapes that they make when walking, and actually that many people, the vast majority of people that I measure, run better than they walk. There's more restriction within them when they're walking. And the running action frees that up. And it's because, I should never say because there are no absolutes in movement because we don't know everything yet. But it seems to be very strongly correlated to the arm position. So I'll just move my camera again. So when we run, we kind of pick our arms up so that they don't flap around like this. There was a Chinese marathon runner, was the elite marathon runner, and she would run with her arms flapping down here. It was quite a few years ago now. So, which was very interesting. And she didn't really last long. So, because even though she was tiny, you flap your arms around here, the upper body stays very still. And so again, you're a sack of potatoes on the pelvis, and the legs are having to do more work. So if you're at the elite end, you're leaking energy because there's so much less dynamism in the upper body. That's beside the point. Anyway, so most of us, we instinctively pick our arms up out of the walking equation. So when we're walking, there's always one foot in contact with the ground, and we've got all four limbs are doing something different. When we're running, the shoulder girdle, so arm, collarbone, shoulder blade, rib cage, thoracic spine, moves pretty much as one unit, pretty much. Our legs continue to do the same thing, putting one foot in front of the other. But now, of course, we've left the ground, joyously left the ground. So, but what we now have, of course, is impact. So whatever restriction is brought to the table is still there. The body is freer when running. If it's to do with the upper body, I'll come back in a moment. But now we're adding impact forces. And then as soon as we've solved the problem, the body is even freer when running. And now the impact force is the tipping point, because the walking gait is improved. The tipping point for pain when running is either later or gone, depending. And of course, it depends on a variety of things. So in my experience, the vast majority of running problems which occur below the waist because that's the place that's doing the most work and it's having to absorb the most impact forces and is doing all the power stuff. The root cause is in the upper body. And because that word again, if we consider the whole global movement as the harmonious cooperation of the shoulder girdle and the pelvic girdle, then if the shoulder girdle isn't doing its thing, the pelvic girdle will need to do more under suboptimal conditions. And the exception to that is feet. Because if your feet are tight, then in my experience, to some degree, so will your shins be, so will your calves be, so will your hammies be, so will your glutes be. So sometimes the answer isn't above the waist. And I say that, and invariably it's the same thing. The answer is above the waist and in the feet. And where hurts is what's doing most work in more challenging situations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, of course. And you mentioned arm swing. Is there a more efficient arm swing to run with? Is that something we can work on to free up more range of motion in our upper body?
I'm so glad you asked. Thank you so much. Yes is the answer. So, which is why I'm terrible at marketing, but I am so proud of my running invention. This, my lemni, which is, lemni is short for lemniscate. Lemniscate is the figure of 8 on its side, sign of infinity. And I created this in frustration when I was doing more coaching than clinic work. Because it was like, okay, arms, what are you doing? Nobody comes into my clinic saying, I don't know what to do with my legs when I run. But I cannot tell you how many times I've had somebody come into my clinic saying, but I just don't know what to do with my arms when I run. And I'm thinking, why don't people know what to do with their arms? It's really odd until you think about why that might be. And there is that once again, we enter into the realms of people are unaware until something goes wrong. So often, so I've only had one person, one in all the years I've been doing this, one person who knew their arms didn't swing as they walked. One person. He was 9 years old. He was
Okay.
9 years old. Even his mum hadn't realized. And he said he knew because he was teased at school and he tried to make his arms move, but it felt so odd. He just ended up having to stop and just dealt with the teasing. And in the end, his friends got to know him and realized he was a really, really good guy. So yeah, only one, 9 years old. So many people are going around. So if you video yourself walking, you don't, the running is the icing on the cake, but you will gain so much information if you, because all runners walk. We all have to walk, even if we don't. Even if we decide, I know for me, I have failed. If I take a walking step during a run, it's not a run, it doesn't count, and all of that man-made, interesting concept for me. It doesn't make sense to me, but, each to his own. But away from running, we walk. We walk loads. We're meant to walk. We put one foot on the other. It's efficient. It's an efficient modus of transport. So if you video yourself, you don't want your eye to be caught by anything. And you might find that you discover that one arm swings more than the other. And you might also discover that your arms don't swing at all. And as I say, every single person who I've measured who hasn't had an arm swing at all didn't know, apart from the 9-year-old lad. So arms, if you don't use your arms when you walk, you don't know what to do with them when you run.
Yeah.
And I think that's where all of the cues around arm movement originated. It's a hypothesis. All of my thinking is a hypothesis. I just get to test my hypotheses objectively with Doris. I say, okay, Doris, I'm thinking this. What do you think? And she'll say, yeah, interesting. Or she'll say, no, move on, think again, go back to the drawing board. So I get to explore movement. I dream it, I do it, I test it, I love it. So if you discover your arms don't swing when walking, you probably aren't sure about them with the running. And you may have had somebody say to you, pump your elbows, or send your fingers in the direction you want to go, or rigid fingers, or something like that. Pumping the elbows is a common one.
Yeah.
And I will think, well, every single cue will have had validity for a cohort of people, just not everybody. So who would that have helped? And it would probably have helped those people who don't have a freely flowing, innate organization of shoulder girdle movement, even when walking. And they would have been told what to do with their arms, and it makes them feel better because now it's something that's tangible. However, it's not as efficient as it could be. So therefore, it's an energy leak. So I have to bring the camera back down again. For all those listening rather than watching, so the pumping elbow. So the best thing to do is you do it in your own body, because then you can feel it. So if you stand up and just pump your elbows backwards and forwards, and you're just invariably, everybody just stands on the spot. So I'll do this in workshops, and we pump away, and we're rooted to the spot, really. Nothing much is happening. But then so I'm going to put my lemmy between my hands, which looks remarkably like a rolling pin, but is obviously nothing like a rolling pin. So if I now roll, it's almost like I imagine I've got sparklers on my knuckles. I'm in the dark. I've got sparklers on my knuckles, on my elbow, and on my shoulder. So viewed from the side, I've got at these points on my hand, elbow, and shoulder, I've got sparklers. And if I imagine I'm making little circles with those sparklers, so I'm drawing little circles in the air, and then I look at what my hands are doing from the front when I do that, and I'm making a little figure of 8 on its side. Can you see that? So I'm making a little figure of 8 on its side, and it feels like, if I exaggerate it, it feels like an up and over of my shoulder, and then a down and back, up and over, down and back. And when you're running, it feels like, I don't know, I'm Rocky Balboa, and I'm sort of shadow boxing down the road there. And so I've got this figure of 8 on its side thing going. So now I'm going to stand still, and I'm going to roll my shoulder girdle, and I am taking off. I am going somewhere. So when I'm just pumping my elbows backwards and forwards, I'm not going anywhere because my upper body stays rigid whilst my arms are moving. If I am pumping my elbows and moving my torso and I was airborne, my legs would be all over the place. So I can't do this. This is too much. But this is not too much. So the natural movement of the shoulder girdle, because we're 3-dimensional, is a figure of 8 on its side. It's the same as the pelvis. So the pelvis goes, there's a seesaw up, down, and a rotation, which is your stride forward, back. And it rolls like a figure of 8 on its side. So we have this cooperation between the shoulder girdle and the pelvic girdle. And if the arms do this little figure of 8 on its side, not the arms, but it's the shoulder girdle, it's the whole girdle, then we have this dynamic movement the arm swing pumping backwards and forwards is, of course, dynamic, but it doesn't drive a movement into the torso. But if we have this figure of 8 on its side movement, it drives the movement into the torso. The torso becomes dynamic. You become lighter on your feet, and the stride opens. So I measure lighter on feet, less impact forces to mitigate, and I measure longer stride for the same effort, just because that cooperation is, so you're lighter because of the dynamism, and the cooperation frees the tension into the pelvic girdle. So the stride length increases not just because you're lighter on your feet, but because there's cooperation between the shoulder girdle and the pelvic girdle. I think I got there in the end. Did that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And am I correct in saying if we're like pedaling with our shoulders, the movement you just said, we're creating length on the pelvic and the shoulders. It's elastic energy, and we're more stable on one leg
Well,
than head over feet.
it's the gift that keeps on giving. It's very difficult. So if you always, I exaggerate. If in clinic, if somebody can't quite feel something, I get them to exaggerate it, because that's what I do. In order to understand something, I'll exaggerate it to then better understand what might be going on. So If I am maybe flex a little bit, I can pump my elbows and still stay flexed. But I can't. My three-dimensional movement of the shoulder girdle is limited in that flex position. I can pump my arms, but my torso isn't moving. But the three-dimensional movement of my upper body is limited by that flexion. So you sort of grow to access the movement. You grow and you become more aware of that lift. And it's also the hand position, because a low hand, if my hand, so I see a lot of runners, so they've got one hand up here and the other hand down there. And that low hand will make it harder to be light on their feet, harder to be upright, and harder to get the weight effectively over to the other side. So this side is having a holiday to a certain degree because this hand is up, but this hand might be holding the weight over to that one side and not helping weight shift over to this side. So when I said this side is having a holiday, this could actually be the high-handed side, could be the side that bears the most pain, because you can't get your weight over to it because this low hand isn't gifting it. There are no rules. It all gets quite complicated. So I'll try and make that simpler. When pains tend to be down one side and you're running, you're not hopping. So, this is where age drives me mad. So it's like, I'm too old. Like, oh no, I haven't reached my peak yet. So there's no way anybody else is too old for anything. So, and if it's one-sided pain, then everything is the same age in your body and you're not hopping. So it can't be age. There must be a stressor on that side that is greater than the stressor on the other side. And very often, getting the weight from one side to the other is the mischief maker for repetitive strain and chronic pain. So the upper body, for me, the upper body is the king of weight shifting. So our legs do that lovely, well, my left foot is on the left side and my right foot's on the right side, and they just do their little train track thing. My upper body gifts my weight into each side on the opposite. And if you don't weight shift well, one side, you'll never get out of one side and you'll stay in the other side. You'll never get out of that side and you'll never get into the other side. So, and it's not necessarily the side that you don't get out of that hurts, because when you land, again, a demo, if you hang on to something and your foot is underneath your hip and you bend your knee and you can go up and down and you've got this much give. So it's not about balance, it's about how much give have you got in the system. Okay. Then if I've got my weight over to that foot. So let's pretend I haven't quite got my weight over onto that foot and I've stayed somewhere else. So then I've got to put my stool over there. So my weight is now going to stay over to the side. And now I've got this much give. So when my weight was over my foot, I got this much give. I've got, big range of motion. And when my weight isn't over the foot, I've got less. So I can't make any more. I can't make any more in the time it takes to just have a give. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It is. So sometimes it's not what you think. If you are always left, at least the give in the landing is easier on that left, but it's almightily difficult on the right because you're not where you need to be and there's not enough shock absorption on the right. So sometimes there's too much work going on and sometimes there's just no shock absorption and therefore it's jarring. And the problem is you have to look at everything, but it's not really a problem. It's only a problem when you realize you can't just look at the problem. So if the knee is the problem, you can't just look at the knee. You have to look at how the everything speaks to that knee. Is the body moving above the knee making it easy for the knee or really hard for the knee, and in what way? Then the answers are fairly simple.
Yeah. And that's something Doris can tell you?
No, Doris doesn't give me the answers. She just tells me objectively what's going on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So answers come in the form of, would you believe, more questions. So let's go to feet. If we use real examples, it's easier. So are we allowed to use your feet?
Sure.
So your left foot had some pain and has had pain. Do you want to tell us about your left foot?
Yeah, it developed a few years ago. It was first a numbing in the toes, and it felt like a pebble was between my toes in my metatarsals. Went to the doctor, to the podiatrist, and they told me it was a Morton's neuroma. First, I did some strength training for my feet, but it didn't really help. Went to a specialist, and they took really the time to make a specialist program for me. It took about a year, but the pain left eventually, and I started wearing barefoot shoes, and well, worked on the entire chain with her, and that helped. But as soon as I stopped with some exercises, it's back again.
Okay, so sometimes the protocols work. Fantastic. I think that every single protocol exists because it's helped enough people. And if there is, rest is overrated because I think we're resilient. So rest, I feel, is overrated and overused. So not doing the thing you love is not a good enough answer for me. So, but sometimes you just have to let things settle. But then if you haven't got to the root cause of the problem, then as soon as you go back to what you loved that seemed to trigger the pain, or make it worse or whatever it might be, then we know we haven't got to the root cause, and rest is not going to solve the problem. So, taking your 6 weeks off for a hammy strain isn't going to solve the problem if there's nothing to do with the hammy. It's the strains of the entire body revolving around the hammy that are straining it. You have to deal with that. So with a foot, and metatarsalgia and Morton's neuroma, ridiculously common in runners. Numb toes, tingly toes, plantar fasciitis, all of those things. And I would always look to, well, can this foot, is it free to function? Is it? Just ask the question, is your foot free to function? And if somebody strokes, so if you imagine your hand is a foot, so the thumb is the big toe. Obviously, normally the big toe is longer, but never mind, just forget that bit. So this is the big toe, and we've got an arch on the inside. We've got where the toes meet the foot here, and then we've got another arch that we tend to stand on, hopefully, between the base of the pinky and the heel. So here's my heel. So if somebody was to stroke your feet, so I'm trying to think from a foot point of view. So we go up on the outside of the sole of the foot, down on the inside, and then where the toes meet the foot. If the foot goes and is articulate, which is obviously not a very scientific term, but a more medical term might be hypersensitive, then your feet are not free to function. So they're feet and they do their best, obviously, and we love them. But they are not free to function because the skin is hypersensitive. Well, that's no good, is it? Because we want to bounce around on them. And some of us want to bounce around on them all day. So, and we want to be on the spectrum of hyposensitive, I can't feel anything, to hypersensitive, oh, don't touch my feet. On that spectrum, we want to be somewhere nicely in the middle. Just average in the middle. And so what we've established then is they are not free to function because the system will have some kind of protective mechanism, protective ways of moving through the feet, which have 33 joints or layers of muscle, 26 bone, gazillion million neurological endings, dense down there. There is no room for extras. So Morton's neuroma is a little bit extra. There's been attrition there, and the system has grown. So in the same way that we do the gardening and we develop calluses on our hands, where the brain senses there's a bit too much friction going on here, it will send whatever resources are required. It'll either be skin cells to make a callus, or bone cells to make a bone spur, where you've got a tendon attached to a bone and there's a continual pull. So that's the pump bump, where the Achilles attaches onto the heel bone. That's a common one. Or where the patella attaches onto the shin bone on that knobbly bit at the front there, the tibial tuberosity. That's another. But these bony spurs are there for a reason. Mr. Wolfe put his name to it. Wolfe's Law, back in the 18th century, I think. So Wolfe's Law says that if you friction something a lot, the system will make more. It's how we have hypertrophy. It's how we grow muscle. We sort of damage them, and the brain thinks, oh my goodness, we've got some damage going on. Send some more muscle cells. and then we grow muscle. In a foot, there's no spare space, but there was friction that this is how I interpret it. There's enough friction between the bony ends of the foot, where the long foot bones, when they meet the toes, for a cyst-type structure to grow itself to protect. But then there's now not enough room for that as well, and you're walking over it. So, and often when they cut them out, they have to redo it because the root cause is still the same. You're still walking in the same way, and there's still too much friction there. This will take me nicely on to laces and my soapbox in a minute. So your feet will strategize. The hypersensitives will strategize. And invariably, what I measure is rigid feet. So the feet will be tight, rigid. As you walk, not much will be happening. But when we're running, so ankles don't necessarily move when we're walking, but we don't need ankle dorsiflexion when we're running necessarily, because we're up in the air. We get away with this a bit more, but now we've got impact. So there'll be all sorts of strategies that the foot engages in without you having any idea, because they're beautifully wrapped up in your socks and your shoes, whatever the shoes that they might be. And we're not seeing anything, and they're definitely not free in said socks and shoes. And we are from the ground up, because we've got a whole pile of muscles that go from the foot into the calf or into the lower leg. If the feet are tight, because they need to be, because they're hypersensitive, because the brain is saying, oh, no, be tight, just stay tight. Don't move very much because you're hypersensitive. Otherwise you'll have toes pinging up all over the place. So the system tends to make rigid feet or toes that ping up, but nothing else moves. And then the tension goes into the lower leg. And of course, the calf and the hammy tendons do this. So if you've got calf tension, you've got hammy tension just because of the tendons. They're like, they're together. Posterior chain, all of that. And of course, if you add a forward head into the mix, then your system is really challenged. Having said that, you can make very crazy shapes and there's no pain. Just because you make some interesting shapes does not mean to say there's going to be any pain, and you cannot predict where the pain is going to be if there is pain, which is an interesting thing. So we think we know stuff about postures, but if it was absolutely so, everybody with a forward head would be in pain, and they're not, which is endlessly interesting and just tells us, that we just don't know enough yet. Anyway, so we have got a foot that doesn't really move and a problem in it. So exercises, so say the foot wasn't tickly, say the foot wasn't hypersensitive, and say the foot for some reason wasn't strong enough, then strengthening exercises could be really useful. And you're not isolating any kind of muscle, it's too complicated down there, but from the foot into the lower leg. Exercises could help, and they do for so many. When they haven't solved the problem, then we just need to dive a little bit deeper. Are those 3 receptive fields in the feet still active? And you did the test, didn't you? And they
weren't very active. It was a very rigid feet.
So all we do is invite information into the skin by foot wiping. And I've done countless videos on Instagram for this. It was a way of, it's almost as if we are pushing more information into the system to desensitize or wake up, depending on whether or not you are on the spectrum, hyposensitive or hypersensitive. We're not switching things off and switching things on because we can't. It's not that kind of thing. We're just speaking to the skin, which has been speaking to the brain, trying to get a different outcome. So I learn from amazing people who work with kids that can't walk, talk, see, hear, all sorts. And they can walk, talk, see, hear after speaking to the brain in certain ways. So you can apply that understanding of how the brain works and how it instructs the body to everybody's advantage. When the bar is really low because there's a major, major problem, it seems that the stimuli for that person solves the problem. But if the person is more organized, if their brain is more organized and they're up here, so that same stimulus down here that worked for down here doesn't necessarily work when the brain is more developed. So it was just applying the principles and then being able to measure. So all I did was I got 15 lovely people with very tickly feet, hypersensitive feet. And I said, could you wipe your feet for 2 minutes twice a day, please, thoroughly? And I gave them a video how to do it. So they're just basically as if they've got muddy shoes, but they're barefooted and they're not missing any single millimeter of skin. So we need something 3-dimensional to get into the high arches. But a doormat does, because you can use the corner of the doormat. And off they went for 3 months to wipe their feet. And meanwhile, one of them, who was a passionate marathon runner, but was always a 5.5-hour marathon, always, doesn't matter what she did, it was a 5.5-hour marathon. And she wore Vibram 5 fingers, so proper barefoot. But she just thought she loved the marathons, but she just couldn't get any faster. And she went to the gym and Pilates and you name it. And she had the tickliest feet I have ever tested in my life. Rubbing her bare feet on textured surfaces made her feel a bit sick initially, but she persevered because I needed her to be part of the guinea pig group. And then 3 months later, there was still a few tickles left, but so much better. Measured fantastic on Doris, and off she went and did a 5-hour marathon. No other training, just
Remarkable.
more functional feet. So these are gains that are so easy. You're not having to even get sweaty. But it's such a simple thing, but it works. And now I've got terabytes of data on Doris for foot wiping being an easy, simple, free way to access better function of feet if feet are either hypo or hypersensitive. Yeah. So I don't know if it works if your feet are just standard, because I don't get to measure those people in my clinic. But my suspicion is, because we seem to wrap our feet up in cotton wool and socks and comfortable shoes very early on, my suspicion is the vast majority of people have got feet that are a little bit woo, and the brain is strategizing around that sensitivity and not allowing for the fullest foot function. So I want to optimize everything for efficiency of movement. So if there's even a little bit of restriction in my feet with 33 joints and all of that free energy from elastic recall that could start down there, then I'm going to go for it. So the foot wiping gives the feet freedom, and then the exercises, now that the feet are more free, walking up and down a dirty great big rope. So I think every house should have a doormat, a scratchy doormat inside the house for barefoot foot wiping. And every television should have a dirty great big bit of rope, not for the battle rope like this, but to walk up and down for random variable, as different as you can make it. The challenge is every single footfall is different. You're walking along a rope in bare feet, asking the foot to do all sorts of turned in, turned out, foot straight, heel down the floor, toes up on the rope, just mucking about, nothing specific, because the key to our ambulation on uneven ground is the 33 joints in our feet, which are meant to be free to move, to organize us without face planting or ear planting, because our feet are rigid and they can't cope. They can't give the information quickly enough.
After a few weeks of foot wiping and in the role play, it really wakes up the feet, and it's like you feel the ground more when you're just walking, and it's a really extraordinary feeling that it's something so simple is so effective to free up the feet and make it more flexible. The intrinsic foot muscles, I can imagine doing more now. Yeah, it's really remarkable that something so simple is so effective.
Yeah. And thank you for giving it a go and experiencing it for yourself. And it is simple, but I think that it is all simple because, all things being equal, a baby organizes itself to beautiful movement. Nobody has taught the baby into the toddler, into the child, beautiful movement. It just happened. And I think that's accessible for all of us. It's just, if it isn't beautiful movement, we need to speak to, okay, who's in charge in the brain here? Who's in charge of that particular bit? Let's go speak to who's in charge to get the answers that we want. Not if it's a shoulder problem, don't go to speak to the shoulder. The shoulder isn't in charge of the shoulder. The everything that the shoulder attaches to has massive relevance, including the jaw. Great big clue there. So the jaw in the head is the hierarchical to the shoulder because they're directly linked. So it's that kind of thing. It's just, even if you just scan your web of investigation one joint further, that would be, you'd get more information than if you just stayed with that joint alone.
Well said. Well, Helen, it's been a joy chatting with you. We're already in 1 hour and a half.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Go on.
I'm loving it, so no problem there. But I do want to be mindful for your time. I know you have to go somewhere as well, or you can stay chatting for hours. I feel I'm maybe 1/3 through my questions. It's perfect.
We can do it again if you want. I'm delighted to chat about my favorite subject. And if it's your favorite subject too, yay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much. Where can people find you and work with you?
So I have a website. Helen-Hall, HALL.co.uk. I'm on Insta. I try on Insta to be helpful once a week. Helen Hall PFM. I try on YouTube, but I found that very difficult and soul destroying. But I uploaded as much as I could. So there's quite a bit of what we've discussed as hopefully helpful videos on YouTube at the PFM way. And what we've been discussing there is on my online courses, which you can see the book and the online courses are on my website. So yeah, thank you for asking.
Put the links in the show notes as well.
Thank you very much.
And you're working on a second book. That's also very exciting.
Yes. Do you want to know the title? Did I tell you? Of course.
No, not yet.
So 20 ways to more speed for less effort. Oh, hang on a minute. Hang on. That's the subtitle. Title, The Smooth Run.
Cool.
The Smooth Run. Subtitle, because I'm on my board. Behind the screen here is my board with all of my options, title and subtitle, all up there. I've got to take a picture of it for posterity. So, The Smooth Runner, 20 ways to more speed for less effort, hidden in plain sight.
Looking forward to reading it when it comes out.
Hopefully this year.
Very nice, very nice. Well, thank you very much, Helen, and hopefully we speak soon again.
Thank you, Joost, for having me.
You're very welcome. That's a wrap for today's episode, and thank you for listening. If you're enjoying the Aerobic Edge podcast, the best thing you can do is leave a review at Spotify or Apple Podcast. It just takes a few minutes and helps other runners to find the show. And if you want to take your training to the next level, come and talk to me. I work with recreational runners who want a structured, evidence-based approach to building real aerobic fitness. The first call is free. You'll find the link in the show notes or over at pacebodies.com. Thank you for listening and see you in the next one.